I used to live on West Broadway, and one Saturday morning, they were emptying out a rubber warehouse. And so I phoned the CEO of the company, and the rubber was just all over the street, tons of it. And I asked the CEO if I could take the rubber away, and he said you could take as much away as you can get. And there was a front loader that was hauling it into trucks, so I went there with Philiph Glass and a couple of other people, and I told them to hold it for a minute, and I had a pickup truck, and we just piled as much rubber as we could possibly take and made 2 or 3 trips back, and then we brought it up to the 6th floor of the loft I was in, and it was like being given a grant of material to work with. And I started to work with, first I started cutting it and hanging it and folding it, and I did, probably upward of 20 pieces with it. And I was working with rubber, and I'd written down a verb list. And the verbs were like to drop, to swirl, to curve, to lift, to roll, whatever. And I took one piece of rubber that was lying flat on the ground. It was about, like 3 feet wide and 10 or 12 feet long. And I took it on its thickness, which was about 1.5 inches, and I lifted it up. If you lift it up, it forms a continuous topographical shape where there's an inside and an outside that's continuous. And it looked like a sculptural form to me, much like a priest's collar. And I had it standing in my loft, and I kept looking at it, and I kept thinking, well, this doesn't look like any sculpture I know, and if you actually just tap it, it's going to lay boom flat again, so it only exists when you lift it. So the piece was really a reaction to the verb to lift. And anyone looking at the piece could reconstruct what had been done just by reading the title and looking at the piece. At the same time, I had a need to make work using a more pliable material other than just dealing with sheets of rubber, but I wanted a material I could also hand manipulate. I was working with Philiph Glass, and Philiph Glass was a plumber at the time. And I used to go and help him. And Phil was working with lead at the time, so we went out and we bought a lead roll of 35 feet of it. And we unrolled it and rolled it back up. And that didn't seem to be anything too extraordinary. Then we took a big sheet of lead, maybe 12 by 12 feet, and we rolled two rolls together into the center. And still it seemed to be formally didactic, but it didn't reveal much. Then we took one piece of lead, it was about maybe 10 by 12, and we rolled up one edge, and then we rolled up the other edge, and then we took the other edge and lifted it into the air and turned it back on itself and dropped it around like this. So basically, the form goes, and then it bends back like this, and then it comes up around like this. So it was a triple roll. And Dick Bellamy was running a gallery in New York called Godolsky. I showed the lead rolls with him, and then immediately the Whitney Annual wanted to put them in the Whitney, and I showed them in the Whitney. At one point, we were dealing with props against the wall, and I was using lead sheets to prop against the wall and from wall to floor. And you take a sheet of lead, put it against the wall, take up a roll of lead, pole of lead, lay the pole against the sheet, and the pole's holding the sheet. Or have a piece of lead in front of you, have a roll of lead against the wall, and have the roll sit on the top edge of the sheet, and one's holding the other up. All of those pieces were based on the fact that they were mutually interdependent on each other for their balance. And yet lead has a high order of entropy, so it's going to collapse eventually. But we did a lot of them, and we showed them. There was a show called the Theodoron Awards at the Guggenheim, and they invited me to that show, and I showed, I think, about 8 of them in that show. But they were still all against the wall. I hadn't come up off the floor yet. And it bothered me that they were against the wall because I understood that it was some sort of pictorial hangover. It still could be read not as relief, but as some kind of pictorial manifestation of making sculpture. And I wanted to build something freestanding. And one day I decided, first I'd built it in plywood, and I was working with a lot of just 4x4 sheets of plywood. I stood up something that looked kind of like a house of cards in plywood. And I thought, I'm going to get some sheets of lead, and I'm going to put this up in my loft. We were on the 6th floor. And the elevator had broken, and finally we got the elevator to work. And we took up 4 sheets of lead that together was about a ton of lead. Each piece was about an inch thick. And we put dunnage, with pieces of wood, big timbers, inside of the square where we were going to set the piece up, because we thought if it imploded, if it fell, it was going to go right through the floor. And if it went through that floor, it was going to go through the next floor and the next floor. And at the time, I was married, and we put the piece up, and I put it up with friends of mine. 2 of them happened to be composers, Steve Reich and Philiph Glass, and another was a performance artist who's now dead named Spalding Gray, and another flute player named Dickie Landry. And we put the piece up in my loft, and I was married at the time, and I asked my wife to come by and see it. And she said, "You can't make that. That's not art." And I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "You're smoking too much dope, you're crazy, and you're going to hurt somebody." And I said, "Look, if you don't think that's art, then I don't think we can stay married." And she said, "That's not art," and we got divorced.